So, usually a conversation starts with a greeting, something like "Hey there," right? This greeting is kind of a very casual thing. Now, this obviously depends on your situation. If you're going into a business interview, you'll be shaking your hands and doing like the formal greeting. But the main purpose of the greeting is mostly just politeness, just saying hello, and telling people what your name is if the person's a stranger. That's usually the first port of call. Right. If a person is equally polite and willing to talk, they're going to offer their name as well. So it doesn't really matter too much what you say here, right? Here's some examples of very common Australian style greetings. Hi there, how you doing? What's up? These types of things. But eventually you're trying to get to the point where you say something like, hi, my name's William, right? And greet them. This is when most people will respond with, oh, I'm Peter, or I'm Frank, or something like that. Nice to meet you. Right. So now you've got the report started. That's the beginning of your conversation. Now, which one you choose, which greeting you actually go with, doesn't really matter. You can go with whichever one you want. Right. They're all pretty much exactly the same. Next, you're going to get into your first conversation starter. So now, conversation starters are basically things where you're basically moving from one topic to another to see if something catches. It's a little bit like fishing. So in the example that I was talking about earlier with the dating, their conversation starter was things like, what did you do on the weekend? Or what's your star sign? Things that they think have a high probability of getting people interested in the conversation, getting people ready to start talking. But really what you're doing is you're trying to fish for an interesting topic that both of you can talk about. Right. So normally you do start off with some very, very basic stuff like how's your day going? Right. Are you enjoying this particular meeting or party or whatever it is? And stuff like that. And you shouldn't expect a lot of long answers right at the beginning of the conversation. Right. If you're a stranger, they're obviously going to be a little bit nervous talking to you. Right. But the most important thing when it comes to starting a conversation is that you always want to be the one starting it. You want to take the initiative. Right. To understand what this is about, every conversation has a leader and a follower. So a person who's leading and directing the conversation and a person who's just responding to that particular leader. It's always better for you to be the leader of the conversation because that way you can be the one deciding what kind of topics you want to talk about. Right. Especially when you're in a situation, if your English is not really that good, your vocabulary is limited, and the things that you feel comfortable talking about may be a little bit limited, right? You want to make sure that the conversation stays inside your comfort zone, inside your area of knowledge about, the things that you want to discuss, right? So how exactly do you take the lead in the conversation? It's super easy. All you need to do is ask the first question, right? Because remember that a regular conversation, a give or take, involves mostly one person asking a question and a person responding and giving an answer. The person who asks the question is the person who's directing the conversation, the person who's in control. While at the same time, the person who's answering the question is the person who's doing 90% of the work. Answers are usually more detailed and longer than questions, right? So even though the answer is doing most of the work, then they're not actually controlling the direction. So as long as you're the person, you're the questioner, right, you can generally kind of ask a simple question and then sit back and relax and listen to the other person talk. A lot of pressure off your shoulders. So all you need to do is just ask a casual sounding question. And if you're not very familiar with things like that, you always have the opportunity to just prepare your conversation points beforehand, right? So what you should think of yourself as is similar to a TV talk show host. Okay, so if you've ever watched like an American style talk show like this one, The Late Show, right, you've got the host over here. He's the guy asking the questions, but the celebrity, his guest, is the one who's answering most of the questions. And what they're going to do is this kind of exchange where he continues asking without revealing very much about his own life, right? And he's going to be doing the majority of the talking over here. In this kind of situation, you want to chain one question into another. This is what we call the follow-up question. Right, your goals are to make both of you nice and comfortable, right? You want to build trust, because if a person doesn't feel comfortable and doesn't trust you, they won't really start opening up and talking. Okay, and you want to slowly find some topics or some shared interests which both of you are actually interested in, right? The truth is that people love to talk about themselves, right? I'm sure you've met those friends before where once they start talking, it's all about me, I, all the stuff that's happening in my life. Most people like to talk about themselves. They just need to get comfortable with you first. And so this is where you ask a series of general follow-up questions, show that you're very interested in whatever they're talking about, and eventually they're just going to start going by themselves. They're just going to start running their mouth, and you can sit back and relax. Okay, so what you want to do, right, and this is something you can start preparing tonight, is you can think the next time I meet a stranger, I need an attack plan, right? I need some very simple general topics that I can talk about with everyone and that I can basically start practicing straight away. Right, and you want to use the types of things that you already know. The more you know about your target, the more accurate your questioning can actually be. Right, so I'll just give you a very simple example. Right, let's say I'm at a friend's party, and maybe this is a big party with a lot of new strangers who I've never met before. So I sit down and I want to speak to a stranger. Well, you have to ask yourself, what do you know about this person? Right, what can you use as a bit of a conversation starter to kind of guide you with this? Well, one thing that I do know is that he's at the same party as me and that somebody has invited him. Right, that's very obvious, that's common sense. So what kinds of questions can I ask? Obviously, I can ask him, are you enjoying the party? That's just a nice, comfortable, random question, right? No one's going to think twice about that. And then you can ask something like, who invited you to the party? Who's your friend here? If you guys know the same person, suddenly you've got something to talk about, right? So that's an example of a very simple attack plan, something that you can discuss basically in any type of party situation, right? And then start asking follow-up questions, right? This is a skill by itself. So a follow-up question is when they give you an answer, ask another question that directly links to that particular answer. So I've just quickly drafted up a simple script, something that you might see in a regular party type situation, right? So seeing some guy's party. So this is where I want to start the conversation and I want to lead it. So I might say something like, hi, I'm William, right? And they might respond with, hey, my name's Peter. And I'll be like, great party, huh? Yeah. So who do you know here, right? So who's your friend? Who invited you, right? This is the start of my line of questioning. And this is a very, very standard type of question. People expect to be asked that kind of thing. And he might respond with someone like, oh, I'm with Sam. And then I'll be like, ah, oh, cool, Sam, right. So how do you guys know each other, right? So this is where you can see I'm taking his idea of Sam and then I'm extending it, right? So I'm asking another follow-up question. That means I'm not giving him a chance to change the topic or to run away, right? We're going to continue the conversation. So if we keep going, it says something like, oh, we used to go to the same school. Really? Which school did you guys go to? Oh, we went to UNSW. Then I might be like, is that the one down in Kensington? And he'll be like, yeah, that's the one. So how long have you guys known each other for? And at some point, your goal is to get to this last point here, where the other person starts to go into a bit of an extended response, right? So I'll say something like, oh, probably about 2 years. I was doing engineering there and we were in the same physics class or something like that. So when they start giving you more details about their own life and things like that, that means that you've basically succeeded in the conversation. Okay? If you just keep talking to someone, eventually they're going to start opening up to you. And then that's when you can just sit back and occasionally ask another question while they start doing most of the talking. Right, if you are a little bit new to English, this is the best way for you to actually learn English, if anything, but at the same time, just get into conversations with people, right? Just start by asking a bunch of pretty relaxed and simple questions, right? But always make sure you've got a nice positive energy, so it seems that like you're really genuinely interested in whatever they're saying. Good. Right, now I'll give you guys another simple example. This is something that I talked to one of my students about just recently. We're talking about Uber, So if you don't know, Uber's kind of like a taxi app, right? Somebody comes up to your doorstep and they'll drive you to a destination. And you know, your Uber driver is normally a complete stranger, right? Now, I sometimes, I'm a bit lazy, so sometimes to get to work in the city, I take an Uber. It's about a half-hour car trip. And what I find is if I'm like just texting on my phone and he's driving, it's a bit of an awkward atmosphere, right? Two people just sitting there completely silent. So me personally, I like to have a bit of a conversation, right? But how do I start the conversation? Right, so I get into the Uber and they'll ask me, "Hi, are you William?" And I'll be like, "Yes, yes, how are you today?" Right, that's the beginning. That's my greeting. How do I get into a conversation with an Uber driver? Well, it's the same kind of thing. My first question is, what do I know about this Uber driver? Right, well, number one, I know what his job is. He's driving an Uber. Right? And number two, I know he's working right now. That's all the information I need to begin a really good conversation with a person. Right? So I'll give you a moment. Just think about this. If you got into a taxi or an Uber, right, and you sat down next to the driver, how would you open the conversation? Have a think about it for a moment. So I'm going to tell you my strategy. Okay? The first thing I do is I ask something like, "So, how's your day been going? Have you been working for a long time?" Right? Because I know they're in the middle of work. And most people don't mind having a bit of a chat. And they'll usually say something, right? They'll say something like, "Oh, no, I just started." Or I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I started at 9 o'clock in the morning," or something like that. Right? Now, depending on what they say, I'll say a bit of a follow-up comment. Right? So if they say, "I just started," like I just started my shift, well then I might say something like, "Oh, cool, does that mean, so do you live somewhere around here?" Right? Then I've got a conversation that's kind of going towards where they live, right? What areas they're driving towards and stuff like that. Right? If they say, "Oh, I've been going for a few hours now," I'll be like, "Oh man, you started pretty early then." Right? "How much longer do you have to go?" Right? So you can see how depending on their answer, I might go in different directions, right? How much longer do you have in your shift? Where are you going after you drop me off? All these types of questions, right? And then, because I know a little bit about car driving, right, I can just ask some random questions which I'm interested in. Like, for example, right, "How far have you driven today?" Right? Maybe I'll ask, "Do you ever get some like really annoying customers? Have you ever picked up someone on Friday night who's like really drunk and they threw up in your car," and stuff like that. When you ask questions like that, right, you can be almost guaranteed that every driver probably has a few stories that they can talk about, and boom, you've got a nice easy conversation started. Okay, so even with strangers, all you need is just a tiny bit of information about them for you to start asking the questions. And then you just sit back and listen to whatever they want to say. Right, and of course, right, this will improve your listening as well. The more native speakers you can